All right. Now, we've talked to a lot of activists in the cannabis world who are excited about the direction that is being taken. We've talked to a number of more conservative-minded people who don't think that this should be the direction at all. So I recognize that those are two opposite sides of the spectrum. What I was surprised to see, though, was that there was a cannabis activist, somebody who I thought would have been cheering this all the way along, who is unhappy with what the Trudeau government is doing. The title of this article that I read was Princess of Pot. That's how she's named because her husband, Mark Emery, had been tagged as the Prince of Pot, feels betrayed by the Prime Minister. And listen to this. This is what caught my attention. I haven't been happy about the Cannabis Act since it was introduced. In fact, many of those she encountered, Princess of Pot, that's how she's named because her husband, Mark Emery, had been tagged as the Prince of Pot, feels betrayed by the Prime Minister. And listen to this. This is what caught my attention. She said, I haven't been happy about the Cannabis Act since it was introduced. In fact, many of those she encounters through her advocacy expect her to be excited about impending legislation. The fact is, she isn't. She said, I don't want to burst their bubble by sitting them down and telling them how terrible it really is. As soon as the bill passes, the Canadian public will think, wow, it's finally legal. But when they get busted on the street and given a ticket for smoking a joint, they're going to be all like, what? So let's talk about what she thought the model legislation should look like and what you need to be aware of when the legalization finally is implemented. I'm joined now by Jodie Emery, who is a Canadian cannabis rights activist. Jodie, thanks so much for being with me.
Oh, thanks for the chance to talk.
Yeah, so let's talk about the issues that you have with it, because in the article they go on to say you're over 18, you're going to be legal, you can have 30 grams, you can grow 4 plants, you can buy legal seeds, you can produce your own edibles. Eventually we're going to have edibles. What is the problem with this framework?
Well, legalization activism has been going on for decades, and the government has always opposed it. Police and doctors and governments have always fought against more cannabis access and more cannabis freedom. There are 3 main reasons to legalize: are to stop criminalizing peaceful, nonviolent people for something that shouldn't be an offense, to stop criminalizing the existing multi-billion-dollar industry, which is consensual adult transactions, a free market that self-regulates in absence of regulation from the government. And the third reason to legalize is to stop spending hundreds of millions of tax dollars on marijuana law enforcement. But when this bill was introduced, or actually when Trudeau finally won and put Bill Blair in charge of the legalization file and as the parliamentary secretary to the justice minister, Bill Blair immediately began the talking points about how we need to restrict and limit access, how we have to keep arresting people. Prime Minister Trudeau, a pot smoker himself, says we need to keep arresting people and charging them today and tomorrow and until it's finally legal. And that doesn't recognize any of the reasons to legalize. And in fact, the federal government and provincial governments are all adding hundreds of millions of dollars in extra marijuana law enforcement to enforce the law against something that's not supposed to be against the law. So the government's really only decriminalizing 30 grams of government-grown pot, or the ability of big corporations run by former cops and politicians and big business, the ability to have their own retail sales while everyone else is still criminalized. So it's not really the legalization that we envisioned or wanted, and it certainly doesn't deliver justice to the many hundreds of thousands of peaceful Canadians who are burdened with criminal records that cause far more harm than cannabis ever has or will.
You said so many things that have been a trigger for me as well, because I can't understand how something that is decriminalized and actually legalized is going to require more policing than what the current status quo is. What is the arguments that they're trying to make about why there needs to be more policing?
Well, that's what I'm so confused by, and it drives me crazy hearing all this talk about legalization. It's being legalized, and I have to say, what is being legalized? If you look in our history, people who grew pot for patients or were patients themselves got arrested, went to court. Mark Emery financed those court challenges, and the courts ordered the government to provide more marijuana access to patients to protect their charter rights. Well, the Harper government changed the program to allow businesses to start growing medical marijuana. And then Trudeau and his chief financial officer, Chuck Raffici, and the Liberal Party establishment created regulations for recreational marijuana designed on the medical marijuana system and with such expensive costs involved that these companies went to the stock market. So I call it the great liberal legalization pot stock scam, because this medical marijuana program that was designed to provide medicine is now being exploited by big businesses and U.S. investors and people from all over cashing in on these companies that are being given the government's cartel protection. And when I say that, what I mean is the government literally spent the last 2.5 years saying cannabis is a threat to public safety and security. It's dangerous. It's deadly. We have to suppress it and stop it and stamp it out and go after the criminal market. So they use all of these criminal laws and harsher criminal laws to try and eliminate the market. But that didn't work before. And what really concerns me is today there are 8 offenses for cannabis. Under Bill C-45, the Cannabis Act, there are 45 new offenses, and penalties go from 7 years to 14 years in some cases. And that equates it to child pornography, terrorism, and assaulting a police officer. And some people say, well, they're not going to actually sentence someone to that much time for selling a pound of pot, will they? And the answer is, well, the judge, unfortunately, is not able to give a reduced sentence because of that 14-year max. So the government is really recriminalizing it, except for themselves, to be able to sell it themselves and promise investors and promise big business that they'll stomp out the competition with government gunmen and arrest them like I was arrested and strip searched and charged.
Okay. Let me ask you, because I'm wondering if the Alberta environment is different than the BC environment, because in Alberta, we're replicating kind of what we already had in the alcohol system. So it seemed to me that there was going to be a lot more smaller players in Alberta, a lot more private entrepreneurs and small operations. Is it the case that we're doing it right here, or is this a problem that you're identifying across the country?
Well, Alberta is certainly going with a better approach that I support. And I was on the phone call when they were discussing the regulations. And unfortunately, the reason I'm upset is because cannabis is still being treated like something that's dangerous and deadly and a threat to public safety, when in fact we know that government-sold alcohol and doctor-prescribed opioids are killing people left, right, and center every single day and contributing to crime and death and assault and all sorts of horrific expenses to our individuals and to our society. Cannabis is a safer choice. But the government continues to demonize it for 2 reasons: to justify the criminalization of the past, because they don't want to apologize and say, sorry, we were wrong, we shouldn't have done that, because they intend to keep criminalizing people in the future. And provinces introducing their own regulations, this is actually almost like the worst nightmare. Instead of one federal law, we now have federal, provincial, and municipal rules that are all designed on the federal government's restrict and limit access approach. So while Alberta is doing, a good move by allowing private retail, it still doesn't go far enough in that it continues to demonize cannabis and stigmatize it and treat it like something that shouldn't be available, when we know it's a safer choice that saves lives, and it should be promoted as something that can benefit not only our health, but our economies. Because legalization should mean job creation. It should mean farmers growing hemp and cannabis. It should mean innovators in advertising and marketing and tourism. It means research and development. It means farmers building houses out of hemp and restarting the automobile industry with cannabis hemp. There are so many ways that cannabis and hemp can help grow our economy, but not if the governments seek to restrict and limit it and control it themselves. And sadly, we're seeing far too much government control over the retail sales and their promises to crack down with massive punishments, like 2 years in jail and $1 million fine if you're a landlord who leases to a dispensary. That's outrageous in Ontario, but we're seeing similar stuff all across Canada. And I think the most egregious part is that someone like me and my husband and others who have spent 14 years myself and decades for others fighting for legalization and getting criminalized and persecuted, we are now excluded from the legal market. We're not allowed to own these companies.
Is it because you have a past criminal record? I'm putting that in quotes.
Yes.
I wondered if that was going to happen.
Well, in places like Alberta and others, they have the discretion. So if they think you've been associated with the illegal market before, they can say no to you. So this is completely wrong. Legalization was supposed to recognize that everybody who's peaceful and nonviolent engaged in consensual adult transactions should not be deemed criminals. But now we're being locked out from the legal system and locked up if we dare participate in any other way. So we're stuck in this strange pot purgatory while former cops and politicians and big business cash in, and the consumer and the taxpayers are made to suffer and pay for it all.
I did notice there were a lot of former politicians, ministers, and police officers that were involved in this. You've helped explain why that might be. But what is your plan? Like, what is going to happen to you? What's the next stage in your business? Because if I understood it, you had a mail-order seed business, and I don't know how...
No. Well, Mark Emery sold mail-order seeds from 1994 to 2005, and he used all the money to finance legalization efforts, court cases, ballot initiatives. So that's why in 2005, the U.S. government came into Canada, worked with the Liberal government of Canada at that time, had Mark Emery arrested to face life in U.S. prison strictly for financing legalization. The press release from the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, says it was meant to stop legalization. But Mark made a plea deal. He served 5 years in the U.S., got out in August 2014, and we were broke and in trouble. So we were trying to find a way to survive. And I thought, well, legalization is coming. I ran to be a Liberal candidate. We supported Trudeau. We thought that the dispensaries would all be regulated. And since we never sold cannabis, in April 2016, I thought, let's do recreational adult stores, a franchise model that allows entrepreneurs across this country to join a brand with 25 years of history of activism and politics, and we can help build up a model of job creation and tax generation and all of the great things we thought we could do. But of course, that didn't go well. I got arrested in March 2017, and I pled guilty in December, and I currently have a $200,000 fine as my punishment. So I'm trying to find a way, because that's my punishment instead of jail, so I can't afford it. They know I can't afford it, but I do have years of history. I have all these big businesses wooing me and wanting me to endorse their product and brand, but I would really love to have my own retail stores. I would love, more importantly, to see amnesty offered to all the peaceful, nonviolent Canadians who have these criminal records so that we can even get jobs in other areas. I would love to work with children, but I can't because I have a criminal record. So a lot of people are held back from opportunities, and that's the most devastating part for me. But in the meantime, I might be launching perhaps a chain of coffee shops, since that's a drug I am allowed to sell.
Wow. So the charge that you face and the fine that you face, that's under the current laws. But you're saying that the new law is actually going to be longer sentences and harsher punishments, and there's more of them.
Oh, absolutely. And lawyers across Canada are quite shocked by this and getting very disturbed. So more and more media and political attention is being paid to the fact that this so-called legalization doesn't really legalize much. And when you're looking to the United States, many areas there and jurisdictions are actually giving reparations. So half of the retail stores go to people with criminal records for cannabis. Or on the federal level, there's the Marijuana Justice Act, and it says legalization primarily has to stop the unjust, racially biased, disproportionate targeting of people of color, poor and marginalized citizens in our communities. And that's here in Canada, too. So it's really important. I'd like to promote this new campaign called Cannabis amnesty.ca, and it's a petition, and it's organized by lawyers and advocates calling for justice and pardons and amnesty for all of the peaceful, nonviolent citizens among us who are still being persecuted and still being arrested even today. So we need to stop that unfair enforcement. The reason to legalize is that none of this should have been a crime in the first place. And if the government thinks they can get rid of the criminal market with criminal laws, they need to give their heads a shake, because the criminal market is created by their very own criminal laws. Decriminalize, fully legalize, free market, let us generate the jobs and tax money to give back instead of draining the poor taxpayers of money they don't have to enforce the law in a drug war style crackdown, which is what we're supposed to be moving away from, not towards.
Well, Jodie, I'm looking forward to seeing how this new campaign goes. Thanks so much for making us aware of it, and also the other side of it, because it's the first time I've heard that argument, but I'll look forward to following more of what you have to say about it in the future, too.
Thank you. Pot's hot. I'll be here.
Okay, that's Jodie Emery, who's going to be opening up, it sounds like, a chain of coffee shops. Cannabisamnesty.ca. That connects the dots for me. I've been holding on to this column for the last week, wondering what in the world is going on here, because you hear all the First Nations communities now they want to have a delay on the implementation of the policy, a delay on legalization. I think that she has just keyed in on the reason why. And I'm going to connect these dots for you when we return on 770 CHQR.
Danielle Smith, weekdays starting at 9:30 a.m. on News Talk 770 Calgary.